if you want to understand the deeper roots of Western civilization, how the native European people have flowed through geography and history, how power, ingenuity, mobility, and war has shaped the history of the world itself, stay tuned. Welcome to People the Cultist, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. All these things really help the channel out. Also, check out my merch store where you can find items that can help you support what I'm doing here, and follow me on X if you want to keep up with updates as well. In this episode, I'm going to go over Europe Between the Oceans by Barry Cunliffe. Hopefully I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. Published by Yale University Press, and this edition is from 2008. The book is a really cool combination of a history book and a atlas of sorts. It reminds me a lot of the history textbooks that I used to have when I was a kid in school, but of course this one, it's a high sophisticated version of it. Now, one of the concepts that he starts the work with is called cognitive geography, and it is the concept used in the study of ancient spaces, how we perceive our habitats in relation to the gray areas in our minds. It reminds me a little bit of the ancient concept of Innengard and Attengard, the inner world and the outer world that you see in the Nordic conception of space. How geography always contains gray areas in our minds. And as we expand our knowledge of these areas, the stronger is our sense of being within said geography. So you and I have experienced this. We live in a particular area of the world, particular region, and within a particular country, in a town, in a city, and that kind of thing. And the more we explore those areas, the more they become deeply familiar to us, and to such an extent as being identified with the land in a very personal level. We navigate this world different than the way we navigate areas that we don't know yet. So for a person right now in Beijing, or in the outskirts of any city, they know that geography in a very personal way. It's their world. To me, it's a conceptual area in a map. So these two ideas are not the same. How we develop in it, how we manifest and see the universe in contrast to this area. And our perception affects our viewpoint, a very fascinating, practical truth that a lot of times we don't keep in mind. So the book goes through a linear progression of how Europe was populated and how it developed. It goes through a discussion of the major language groups spoken in Europe. Indo-European obviously will take the stage because it is the main language of the land, and it is the basis of almost every Western language, with a few exceptions like Uralic and Basque, which are not Indo-European languages. They're usually called European languages. Now, the Indo-European language came from Neolithic populations that began to displace or mix with what people would call Mesolithic, native populations of Europe. And to simplify, the Mesolithic were hunter-gatherers. So we're talking about 10,000 years before the Common Era, or before the birth of Christ, whichever one you prefer. So that only applies to the European context, these terms like Mesolithic and Neolithic, because even to this day, you do have cultures in the world that would fall into the category of Mesolithic, hunter and gatherers. So I need to clarify that because these categories are applicable to the European ancient context primarily, and how these populations interacted with each other. The Neolithic cultures, by the way, are the farmers, and they basically shaped Europe through their languages and practices. So these foragers and settlers basically came with a language that was very efficient and very powerful because sedentary cultures tend to develop different ways of communication and also methods of social organization that are very impactful. So as these colonizing farmers kind of moved west, creolization of the language, which is the process of kind of making a language your own, admixing with local ways and traditions and cultural dynamics. And now we have, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Italian, and German. These are all part of the same family, but they're clearly different languages already. I've always found interesting how languages with the same root become slowly, dialects, and then they become true languages. And throughout the book, it has a lot of cool maps that you can see movements of populations and, archaeological findings. The graves of the elites, I've always found that to be indicative of how a culture is exchanging with itself and also with the divine. What happens when you die? This is a very deep philosophical question, and archaeology sometimes gives us really cool answers, at least what it appears to be a perception of the beyond. In the case of Europe, there seems to be a very clear tradition of burial, which is important to note. Some cultures are more into cremation, for example, but in the case of Europeans, especially the elites, they would be buried with their household goods and their jewelry, etc., their weapons, and it seems pretty clear that they believe that these items will go with them. Now, obviously, there's a line there between honoring a person with their personal goods, because even to this day, when you have a family member that you love and they pass, their things become part of their essential elements in a very mystical way. So we feel different about throwing away things from people that we love because they held them or liked them or wore them, etc. And European culture was apparently very deeply aware of this, and they wanted the people that they loved to keep these items and take them with them. Now, there's speculation about what it meant to take these items. Were there reflections of these items in the afterlife that they could use, or did they believe they would resurrect and use these items when they came back? Like, we have examples in the Egyptian model that seems to indicate this idea. But the reason that's interesting is because a lot of people think that burial and some of these conceptions are from the Christian era, and this is just not the case. Just like in the Middle East, you had already burial and a lot of these practices, you have them in ancient Europe as well. And keep in mind that the Middle East is part of the European milieu. The whole North African area, the coast of the Mediterranean, to give you a simpler way of putting it, was always part of the European context, just because of the nature of the area and the navigation and the commerce done in the area and the movement of peoples. Now, the book goes into the Bronze Age, which further developed European culture into a warrior culture, where you have warrior elites that shaped Europe's vision of itself, and also a deeper development of their theological and religious systems that to this day have given preeminence to the combat veteran, to the notion that life is war and conflict, which I think is very, very deeply embedded into the European psyche. Now, this period also brought expansion, exploration, moving south and east, and this began what I was referring to the European backyard, which is Asia. And when we say Asia, we're talking about the Asian continent close to Europe, not all the way to Asia as we know it today. When we say Africa, again, these are all European names given by Europeans to describe continents, but limited to their region. So when we say Africa, they're referring to North Africa, which is their world. And we have the advent of the Sea People, which had a really deep impact in the history of not only the area, but of the world, because it impacted books like the Bible and thus the history of Egyptian culture and the contact and dynamics of Alexander the Great, which continued expansion. Now, Alexander the Great is much later, but what I'm saying is that the Bronze Era and the Sea Peoples really impacted the history of the entire region, and Greece being one of them. Now, I did find it bold and valiant on the part of the author to briefly contrast the decadent and collapsing Athenian democracy with the virile and functional autocratic Macedonian culture, because this is really the source of the eventual conquest of Alexander the Great again. But not only that, the defense of Europe as it is seen historically and was considered to be a big psychological moment, the defense of the entire continent from the Persians by the Spartans, has to do with this very controversial political point that autocracies were better at fighting and defending themselves than democracies that tend towards perversion, decadence, and collapse. And this is controversial because a lot of people don't believe that. A lot of people think democracy is the best thing in the world. But historically, the evidence points in a different direction. Now, republics and democracies are different. And democracies were always seen as mob rule and being antithetical to not only good government, but to functioning nation states. Because if people are just constantly making decisions on their feelings and their whims, and it's based constantly on the majority rule, it's very difficult to get anything done or to have a clear set of ethics that manages anything efficiently. And of course, the book is going to go into the origins of Rome and the impact of Rome, because Roman history at this point has become European history, for better or for worse. Because obviously from the Germanic point of view, it was a negative history. Either way, no matter how you look at it, it's still an important part of European history. It has to be studied. And the book goes a little bit into it. It's not a Roman history per se, but it gives you a good idea, especially in the geographic dynamics involved in the Roman Empire. So I want to close with a quote that I think encapsulates very nicely the dynamics of the book. Imbalances have created the momentum that has driven Europe and continues to do so. Imbalances of resources and imbalances of population, all conditioned by the ageless structure of the rocks themselves, which determine the continent's varied landscapes and seascapes. Landscapes are fickle in their provision of the necessities of subsistence. Many are unable to support population growth and so force mobility, while rarer resources, metals, precious stones, furs, and the like, are unevenly distributed in nature, driving those who want them to develop social networks that facilitate exchange. Thus, humanity emerges willing to be mobile and forced to be sociable. So I think that gives you a very good conception of the way the author sees European history as an ever-morphing, changing, adapting population within a very specific geographic reality, which is Europe itself. The marriage of physical reality and humanity. So hopefully you enjoy the review. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. I will really appreciate it. Thank you for being with me. See you next time.